All right, I see it's recording. All right, Nick, could you do a roll call for us? I think you're on mute, Nate, still.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so Nicole Bailey, I do not see her here. Andrea Chiriboga-Floor, she actually emailed me. She will not be here today. John Conley, not see him yet. Leonard Dittman, in case nobody else had heard already, he actually has resigned from the task force as he retired from the Colorado State Patrol. So just FYI, he is no longer going to be present. It's my understanding that's one of the appointments on the towing task force that actually is appointed by the chief of the State Patrol as opposed to the governor. So it's my understanding he is going to make an appointment at some point. I'm just waiting to hear back on that, who that's going to be. So just FYI. Trevor Forbes.
Here.
Thank you. Troy Hill. Do not see him. Jim Howes. Not see him. Nicole Lawless. Do not see her. Michael Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Gregory Prunsky. See him. Brandon Rich. I think you are here.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Reister. I believe you are here as well. Yes, I see him here, so he is here. Riley Nathan, that's me. I am present. And Joanne Rusha. You do not see her yet. Okay, that's everybody.
Did you get a sense whether Joanne was going to join? Because it's one of the reasons why we're doing this Thursday.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. I mean, I didn't hear that indication. I know she had petitioned to not hold it on Wednesday this week, which we agreed to. But I haven't received an email from her, so she might come in at some point.
Okay.
Thank you.
And John Connolly's here.
Yes, I see him.
All right. Awesome. And then I guess the other order of business, Nate sent out the minutes. So I'd like to get those approved. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
I'll give a motion.
I'll second.
All right. We have a second. Any objections? Okay. Minutes are approved. All right. So I think today, I mean, we may not take with the small group. I don't think there's any rule that we have to take the entire 2 hours. So we can obviously end earlier if we need to. Just administratively, I'll, unless there's a reason I can't, send out an email to at least the one's personal emails we have of some of the folks, not any business, but just reminding them of our next 2 meetings. Because I know our official kind of email, I know I don't check it unless I think there's a reason to. And so they may forget. So I'll ping them on personal emails and just remind them of the next 2 meetings, because I think the next 2 meetings, or at least the last one before November, there may be a vote of some kind. So it'd be good to have more people in attendance. So I'll go ahead and I have a template I'll send out later, but I can kind of share my screen later that it could be an outline of what our report might look like. So just the outline, kind of like the table of contents, if you will. But before I do that, I just kind of open it up for anyone who had any kind of thoughts or ideas or general thoughts on the outline or the report or basically anything before I did that.
Yeah, we had our work group a little while back between I forget which date it was on. And I took some notes of kind of things we might want to think or think we need to include in this report. So I have some notes on that. If you want, Trevor, I can jump in, or if you want to start and then I can jump in where appropriate, or, however you want to do it.
Yeah, why don't you go first, Nate, and just kind of review those notes with everyone?
Sure.
Kind of what we talked about.
Okay. And I think most of who's here right now was at that report group, but I'll go over it again just to give you all a sum up of kind of what we had discussed and some of the reasons for some of these. So first off, putting an outline of where the towing, or at least the maximum rates for non-consensual tows are now, and kind of how we got here maximum rate wise, could be helpful. I think we could probably use pieces of the primer that was sent around at the beginning of the year to kind of fill in some of those gaps and details. That might be a good resource we could pull from to kind of fill in some pieces about that. I think we have to at least address the recent shift in commission policy regarding the CPI inflation adjustment mechanism that was put into place just within the last couple of years. Again, whether or not the towing task force wants to endorse that or object to that or whatever the case, at the very least, we have to mention it in the report that is currently what's going on, and that's been a recent adjustment. Again, however the task force wants to annotate their opinions about it, I think would be helpful. I think it's important to keep in mind that when it comes to that CPI inflation adjustment mechanism, and I've said this multiple times in multiple meetings, is this probably wasn't the best time over this last couple of years to try a new concept like this, just because I think the results have been skewed by other things going on in the world. But as long as that's something that the other towing task force members are aware of, I think we could put something pretty decent together to at least address that's something the commission is trying. And again, whatever else the members might want to say about it. We for sure have to address the consensual versus non-consensual tow rates. That was the really the key change that they made as a result of the tow bill, HB 221314. And we're just going to have to make some kind of a comparison. I think the data that we got through the surveys kind of gives an idea about that. In that, at the very bottom, one of the last questions was, what are you charging for your hook fee for a consensual rate? And again, it's, I kind of broke out in the data that those differences, I didn't break them out by percentage, but it would be pretty easy to figure out what those percentage differences are. You can see the raw numbers, this versus this for the different weight classes. So we could come up with some percentages and put that data into that report as well, along with, just pointing out, if nothing else, that there are some fees that are attributable to non-consensual tows that are traditionally not attributable to consensual tows. So like storage, for example, probably is not going to be charged for a lot of consensual tows, because usually the tow's going somewhere else. It's not going back to the towing carrier's storage facility. It's going to a mechanic, or it's going to the person's house, or whatever the case may be. So as long as we're at least pointing that out, that these percentage differences don't tell the whole story, I think that can lead to some interesting takes and positions on that particular issue. The impact of the new legislation, again, House Bill 221314. Obviously, we haven't really yet seen the results of that, with those statutes only becoming effective within the last couple months. I think we're still going to see some changes within the towing industry, probably in a lot of different areas because of these statutory changes. So that's something that maybe the towing task force might elect to point out, in that this is what it is right now, but we may not have seen the full force of what those changes in statute, what that might result. So that might be worth pointing out. And then finally, the last thing on my list is the recommendation to the PUC, and this was John's suggestion, recommendation to the PUC to add questions to the permit application renewal process, asking for basic, demographic and other types of questions, such as, how many tows have been done, or, maybe just estimates of how many tows are being done in a given year, what types of tows they are, kind of covering the chart question on the second page of our survey. I'm sure there's probably a simpler way to incorporate it into any such suggestion to the commission. But I think that would be helpful, because it's something John's mentioned a few times. And I think, with some of the other data we have in regards to towing carriers, again, just based on current PUC practices, that is one thing I know we are missing, is what types of tows carriers are doing. Because again, the permits they get are statewide permits. They can do anything with them. And we don't specifically track it because, again, they're eligible to do whatever types of tows they want under that permit. Same thing with location. It's a statewide permit, so they could operate in Durango, Denver, Grand Junction, Alamosa, wherever. So, and then again, just some figures in regards to the types of tows, the volume they're doing, might give some additional insight, which we could then splice into other pieces of data the PUC either already has, or may get in the future. So those are the items on my list.
Gotcha.
Real quick, I had a question about the permits. Just to help me out, because I don't know what's required. Are there differences between consensual and non-consensual permits, or is just one permit covers
one permit,
anything and everything? Okay.
And again, it doesn't even cover everything technically. So like repossessions are technically tows, but we don't regulate those. That's an AG's office thing. That's just how the statutes and everything is structured.
Okay.
So again, it doesn't always capture absolutely everything. Same thing with like auto recycling. There's people who have called in and asked if they need permits if what they're doing is like, we buy your junk cars kind of operations where you have somebody who has pretty much a tow truck going to some location, that person signs over the title, and then they hook the vehicle up and either go and crush it or whatever they're going to do with it. So they're basically buying those vehicles from them. We've kind of over the years come to the determination that does not require a towing permit either, because at the time the vehicle is being towed, after the title has been signed over, all they're doing is transporting their own property at that point. So it doesn't require a permit. So, and then repossession is the other big one. But yeah, no, if you're going to do the big three categories, law enforcement ordered, consensual, non-consensual, it doesn't matter. Same permit required for all.
Yep. All right. Anyone else, any thoughts on some of the items Nate brought up? So the list I sent to you, Nate, and I'll share with everyone else, I think mostly captures, but I may have missed something, mostly captures the things that Nate outlined. So if y'all want, I can kind of share my screen. Yeah. We can kind of read through that, and then you guys just jump in and say, hey, we should remove that, change this wording, whatever. And then maybe if we can come up with a rough outline during this meeting, then hey, next meeting when we have more participants, we can hopefully start filling some stuff in.
So real quick, I didn't write down the second to last item that you listed, Nate. I was just hoping to get just a recap on that.
I think you're muted, Nate.
Sorry. Yeah, it's the impact of new legislation. House Bill 221314 has yet to be determined. I think just pointing out that because of some of the shifts we saw as a result of the new legislation, those shifts, we haven't even begun, I think, to see how that's going to end up panning out. So I think just an acknowledgement of that. I don't know that we have.
Did you say shifts or shit?
Shifts with an
F.
Sorry, I think I slurred that word a little bit. They're shifts, big shifts in the towing industry. And so, thank you for pointing that out, John. Anyway,
on that one, probably the only thing the only thing we can really say is that, well, some fees have been reduced by statute, right? The notification fee, and then the amount you can charge on daily storage has not actually technically changed, but it has in real life because it became prorated instead of a full day. Right. So we know those are decreased, but what impact, if any, that has on the towing industry, we just don't know. So
yet. I'm sure we'll see some trends and stuff at some point. But I mean, legislation like this that is so impactful. I mean, it might be a couple years before we actually can point to something and say this is what happened because of this. It's just. Yeah, it's too wide an issue. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I suspect we may never really know, because if you just look, and Nate knows this, the rate at which towing companies go out of business is extremely high. I think we did the math once, and it's like the same number of towing companies generally stays constant, but the churn is almost 50% from as far as permits going away and new permits coming in. So it's a lot of turnover in the industry just because the margins are so thin. And so because so many are going out of business and churning all the time anyway, it's going to be hard for you to be like, oh, it was because of this. And it's like, well, half of them are going out of business anyway. So how can you really say that's it?
It's because it's the perception that the towers make a lot of money. So people get into the towing business thinking they're going to make millions of dollars and end up going broke.
Yeah, that happens.
What's the figure on that, John? I know you've said it before on the tow carriers coming in and out every year.
There's a minimum of 200 in and out every year.
Yeah. And there's about 700, right, Nate? So whatever 2 divided by 7
It
is.
stays around 700. Yeah.
Yeah, it's between 700 and 800 at any given time. Anytime I've looked.
So how do you have that data? I'm just curious.
So we have it's all based on our internal data. So at any given time, I can pull up our internal databases and I can do what they call an active permit search, and it basically just goes through our entire behind the scenes data and pulls every single type of permit that we regulate, and it just populates a little report with a list, and it has the type of permit and how many we have that are active at that singular moment. So
Right.
again, it's at any given time. So, I could do it right now and tell you exactly how many we have as of this moment.
Yeah. And then what I do is I say, how many new permits did you add this year?
Mhm.
And you always see about 200 new permits added every year, but that number never grows. It always stays around 700. So that tells you that 200 are going in, 200 are going out.
Right.
So-
It would be super helpful to know the size of the operations too. So
Yeah. And that's where I think, like John suggested, making a recommendation that the commission might want to consider, as part of the application or the renewal process, providing some of this kind of data could be helpful, because then we could reference that and kind of get an idea or a scope of these different operations. We can then tie that further to their operational location, so we can see where the most tows are occurring from. I'm sure it's probably mostly Metro Denver, but we'd actually have some hard figures to look at in that regard. And again, it's something I don't know that the commission would particularly be opposed to collecting. It's not collected in the past is how I would phrase that. And by the way, there's 724 active towing permits as of this moment.
Gotcha.
I'll say, okay, so the churn is basically, closer to what, a quarter?
Yeah. So I just rough math, call it 25 to
25%.
30% churn every year. So give or take. All right. So I'll share my screen. If that's all right. All right. All right. Can everyone see?
You might want to maximize that.
Yeah, let me see here. All right, how's that? Can everyone see
Good.
that? Good.
Good.
Like I said, this is pretty straightforward, and it's basically just writing down what Nate said. But let's go through each of them, and if everyone is quiet, I'll assume that it's okay. And if not, jump in and say, hey, add this or change this verbiage or whatever. The first one would just be providing some background and authority on the towing task force, that, hey, there was a towing task force from this year to this year. This was the makeup of the task force. I can't remember the name of the legislation number that reinvigorated and created the new task force. But hey, this bill was passed, new towing task force. Now here's the membership. And this is by statute what it's supposed to be doing. So just a quick primer on the task force. This is the big one that Nate was mentioning earlier, the history of non-consensual towing rates. That might be a big chunk. It's just there is a long history and studies and economists and all this other type of stuff that is available there for us to kind of walk through how we got where we are today. So that might be something I'd be happy to do unless Nate wanted to do it. But someone who is kind of familiar and has all the information and data could put together maybe a couple paragraph primer on just kind of how we got to where we are today. I think would be good for framing. Does anyone have any thoughts on that piece?
Hey, Trevor, this is Brandon. Is this where you would put in there Nate talked about, it's important that we put in how it's currently tied to the consumer pricing index. Is this that section we put it in and then kind of address that?
I think so. Right. So you go through the study, the various studies and increases that happened before. And hey, then we got to, I think it was 180 was the last one. And then the next step was, and during this rulemaking, a CPI increase was put in place on this date. And the first CPI increase happened on this date. And this is how we got to where we are now. So yeah, I think the tail end of this number 2 will be mentioning the CPI and that kind of history.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's again, this is I think where we can use that primer that we circulated earlier this year because I think it has a lot of this information. And
Yeah.
it includes the different rulemaking proceeding numbers and I've taken a look through it, not all the way through, but I know I've looked at quite a bit of what's in there, and from what I can tell, it's all accurate. So
Yeah.
I think we can use that data and kind of populate that section. But yeah, no, I agree that the part where we discuss or at least address, you know, the PUC's recent, you know, policy shift in regards to how these rates are populated with the implementation of the new inflation adjustment mechanism. That would, yeah, I think that should be like one of the last things in that section.
Yeah, we might Israel, what y'all think about this, because that's pretty meaty and we may want to include a lot of information. Maybe that number 2 is a quick summary that mentions these things that have happened and then references like Exhibit A, and then Exhibit A could be all that data and information, including that primer in an exhibit. So that way, if somebody wanted to say, okay, they're talking about this, but where's all the background information? They could reference that in the report. Or maybe do we think that that's too much for the report to have an entire exhibit for that?
I think we could strike a balance. I mean, we don't have to use everything from the primer. I think all the data that we need is there to populate that section. We just have to go through and like pick out the biggest or the best portions of what's in there and stick it into more of a report style. Because I remember that primer is kind of more bullet points. Whereas I think the primer should be more of a technical, you know, kind of flowing report.
Yeah. Okay, good. Anyone have any more thoughts on number 2?
I have some thoughts on 1 and 2.
Okay.
Just in terms of writing it up. My sense is that, and I'm hoping Nate, you're up for this, just because you are basically in the staff driver's seat, and ostensibly just basically the person tasked with enforcing policy as you understand it, that you would ideally be the author of those sections. So I was curious if that's if that's amenable to the group.
So my comment on that would be, I would prefer not to do the initial draft. My skill set is more of once something's drafted, cleaning it up considerably. That's just my skill set. So I would prefer someone else take that first, or maybe a group of the members handle that initial draft. At that point, I am more than happy to look at it and lend my expertise to you know, cleaning it up and getting it submission ready. I am totally willing to do that portion of it.
Okay.
All right. Number 3, work of the most recent towing task force. We've had, you know, our first meeting was on this date. We've had X number of meetings and X number of working groups since then. And this is generally what we were doing. I put in here matter discussed, but now that I'm looking at it, like, I don't think we need to go back through our minutes and list everything we talked about during our meetings.
What, you know, I was just sorry, Trevor, don't mean to interrupt. Something just occurred to me. What if we split up the different sections? Like each member of the task force gets a different section and works on a different part of the report. And then, then we combine it all into, and again, that's where I think I would be considerably helpful in making it all flow together. All the different, because everybody has different writing styles and things like that, but I'm good at consistency things with writing. So we could do that. So like, for example, the most recent work of the towing task force, maybe Nicole could do that part because she always does the minutes. So she kind of tracks what we're talking about and that kind of thing. You know, again, that was just an idea that popped into my head. So I wanted to shout it out.
Yeah, no, I do like that idea. It gets everyone involved a little bit and spread loads the work, which is always good. I think I'm great with that. I think maybe what we do is during the next, hopefully we can get more participation during the next meeting, and maybe we farm out or take volunteers to farm out those sections. But I like the idea of like at least the portions that maybe aren't going to be what's the word I'm looking for? You know, there shouldn't be significant differences of opinion. I guess I would say on those sections. I think it'd be good to have multiple people do those for sure. So, all right. Key findings of the survey. This is, I guess, where we would actually, this might have to be an exhibit. I think we might have to an exhibit that they actually reference because it's fairly large and it's a table. But the couple things that I just kind of thought of that you could highlight, right? That you could say, yes, we observed this, is that, hey, you know, for example, towers, you know, over the course of their expenses that they reported changes in, reported a change from this day, I think it was 2015 to 2020 or whenever we asked, of an annualized inflation of this. Actual CPI was this, right? Just a quick snapshot of what carriers are saying happened to their expenses and what we would have expected in the broader economy during that time period. That might be useful. And then the second piece is, is B, what we have to talk about is, hey, the average consensual rate was X, and the non-consensual rates are X or Y, right? Just pure numbers telling them what we reported versus what we found. Any thoughts on what other key findings? I'm sure there's others. Those are just two that jumped out. Any other key findings from the survey that we should highlight or can highlight?
Yeah, I think we certainly are going to have to highlight this. It seems like the most appropriate place to do the statutory mandate where we address the consensual versus non-consensual. So I think B there is something we'll definitely want to include there.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that
for my,
might be a place to put in also more information that we need. You know, this is the information, information that we've got from a survey. Well, there's other information that would be helpful to us.
So maybe recommendations on future surveys.
Well, or like I said, put something simple that's in the renewal process. Everyone's there, they're doing their renewal. You don't have to get into detail. I mean, a ton, but you could put basic numbers. Just, you could do some basic numbers that would help, or it would help a lot of things, actually. I mean, the numbers of tows would help a lot. A lot of people will complain and say, well, there was 12 complaints last year. Well, yeah, but there was 2 million tows and you had 12 complaints, right? We don't know that. You don't know, is there 100,000 tows with 75,000 complaints, or is it, you don't know that information. So
yeah,
without that data, how do you track that? How do you put anything behind that?
Yeah.
That would be good too. Another issue I think that's needed here is even though it looks pretty good, like our response rate, we're well below 10%. And so the significance of our survey results are relatively weak because we're not above 10%. And so that's a shortcoming as well. And that's something we can boost up specifically if we can get these questions into permit renewals.
Yeah, I think, John, what you're referencing, I think goes down in our because that's an actual recommendation for us. They were actually recommending, hey, I'm assuming everyone agrees with us, that, hey, some of this, the towing task force would like to come up with maybe it's even an abbreviated survey, but something that happens at renewal. I think is an actual, it's not a finding, it's an actual thing that we're saying we think should happen. So that would go, so it's a renewal survey recommendation. And then up here, the findings might be just highlighting some shortfalls of our survey, right? The response rate that Michael mentioned, data validity, it is unclear on many of the responses, like what they were even trying to tell us because none of the numbers added up, stuff like that. Just telling someone, hey, we have some findings, but just know that there's some shortfalls here that we need to improve. So
there were also some question rewording needs that I discovered too that I think are fairly important.
Yeah. Okay. On key findings, anything else besides those three kind of big buckets that maybe we should stick in that section?
Well, one I'm not sure where it would go, but it would be really good to do just a quick depiction of the demographic representativeness of the survey. So just to give a sense, a combination of just the response rate, which was low, plus where if we're heavy in various geographic areas or light, and just to get a sense of what the response distribution looks like.
So
You know,
like
It's
like
probably
Trev-
one of the first, should be, sorry, Trevor, but I think
I think
that should probably, one of the first things of that section in the findings of the survey is really addressing kind of the the results and demographics and stuff like that. So as they read through, they already know in their mind, what the survey really consisted of.
Yeah, I agree. Like basically, I agree. So you'd have like, hey, here's the responses. Here's the it's a bad term for this, but demographics, if you will, right? Number of trucks they have, number of tows they do on average, locations, maybe a little histogram that shows responses by size of company or location, and then the survey shortfalls. So to Brandon's point, we've preempted their reading of it, understanding where the shortfalls are. And then we get into these two things that we were able to highlight. Is that kind of what you were getting at, Brandon?
Yeah, Jess. So before somebody starts reading, they know, well, was this, a very thorough survey that was well represented and really like, is this going to be like reading gold, or are you trying to read tea leaves because you got
Mhm.
few response with kind of murky data and you're doing your best to find out what you have here?
Yeah, for sure. Love it. All right. Any thoughts before we move on to number 5? All right. On number 5, I'm just talking out loud. We don't need to write this down. I kind of think I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot we can say. I wouldn't even maybe say expected impacts, but maybe just highlight the things we know that are factual, right? Because there's a lot we don't know. But the factual things are these areas of revenue for towing companies have decreased by this percent. There's other areas in which the rate didn't decrease, but revenue will. For example, like, private property towers are basically required to give people their car backs without receiving revenue for the service they provided. Obviously have an impact on revenue. We don't know what yet, but just highlight that these are real things that impact revenue and are not present in the survey that we just conducted because it was a different time period. And time will tell if we will be able to draw any conclusions on what impact, if any, there is. That's kind of mostly my take, but curious if anyone has any other thoughts on this section.
Yeah, I think that like Brandon should be we should be hearing from his area of expertise. I mean, this is services is to his market, right? So I would say what are the effects on the property owners? That's
Yep.
where the big effect is. I mean, really, you turn this around and put it as a snow removal, right? So consider the tower as a snow removal. Property owner pays to have snow removal done. So what's the impact now if they have nobody to remove the snow or whatever? I mean, it's the service is done by the tower. So the property owners have got to have some feedback there.
Have y'all seen any impacts, Brian, or expected impacts on y'all's end, on Brandon? Sorry.
I'd have to dig in a little bit. I mean, I don't think much has quite bubbled up, to me yet. And so I couldn't say what the actual impact has happened. So
Yeah.
other than some recent stuff that's going through, right, that for sure will have impact. Like when we talked with having to have a third party be an authorized agent instead of the tow companies, that's going to have a direct impact to the residents because they're going to get charged back now for us to hire a third party instead of have the towing company be the agent.
Right. So maybe we can just kind of talk about, hey, like, we don't know yet, but there may be some shifting of expenses and cost structure that may get shifted
This
on.
happening, which is increasing this cost, which will,
Right.
have to be, charged back to the residents. So
Gotcha.
What if we added under number 5, where it says impact on towing industry and maybe we don't even have to say towing industry, just impacts of 2022 legislation from a revenue, financial, and practical standpoint.
Maybe direct impact and say possible indirect impacts, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
I think it's the title. I think he's talking about the title, review of impacts of
Oh, here.
2022 legislation.
So I'm curious. Also, our mandate here is this actually part of our mandate, or is this desired? Because I'm worried that we've got 2 meetings to get through,
Mhm.
and if we're going to do this, we each have various stakeholders that we are representing, and to be fair, all of the stakeholders that would need to, the stakeholder representatives would need to weigh in on the impacts on their groups. And frankly, I'm seeing that being a very difficult set of narratives that would go into the report, and I'm having difficulty seeing that coming out and being finished in a way that's acceptable to everybody in the next 2 meetings. That just seems like a lot, and it seems like there's quite a lot of discussion that would be needed for the various sections. So if there's not a mandate to do this, I think my recommendation would be to say that there will be impacts, and that they need to be addressed, and because the legislation has happened so I mean, it hasn't even gotten into effect until very recently, and so we're just not in a position to do more than speculate at this point. But that will be needed for, say, a report next year. That's my sense. Is it's for us, it's better to just make a brief comment on that, and then work on it for next year's report.
So I would say I agree in the sense of like we should keep it light and not overstep identifying things that are speculative for sure. But the truth is, Michael, a lot of this is not speculative, right? These are very real, concrete numbers of revenue that has been decreased by statute.
Right. Well, so a few of them were
speculation there. Yeah.
Yeah, a few of them were, and especially the ones that you bring up, like the direct price impacts and changes. So those are pretty clearly something we could say about. But what's going to happen to the property owners? That's going to be hard to guess. There will be some impact, sure. But again, if we're going to be, I'm worried that we're opening up a big can of worms here, and if we're going to stray further than the strict impacts that are pretty obvious from the new legislation, I would like more discussion there, and I don't see that happening in the next couple months.
And I think this number 5. I think number 5 was just pointing out that there was some significant changes just made at the legislative level to the towing industry in a lot of different areas. And so just pointing that out, that we have yet to see what kind of an impact that's going to have on the towing industry, on their customers, et cetera. I think, and that's why it was on my list of something to just point out. I don't think we have to delve too deep into it. Just pointing out that, hey, there's this going on in the background that could have an impact on this, but we don't really have any tangible data to prove it one way or the other. But we can expect we'll probably see some in the future. That's really the only thing I thought it would be probably a good idea to point out. I don't think it has to be anything super deep or thorough.
Yeah,
I think that's what Michael was saying. Wasn't that basically what you were getting at, Michael?
That's in line with what I was trying to suggest.
I agree with Michael. Basically, just like let's be careful to constrain number 5. And I think it's basically just like, hey, here are the areas where revenue has actually been decreased. There may or may not be impacts on the broader towing industry, property owners, et cetera, in the future. And the towing task force plans to look at what the impacts of this legislation will have at a later date or something like that. Okay. All right. All right. The conclusions and recommendations. This will probably be the one I suspect that gets batted around a bunch, kind of during our next two meetings. And so just some stuff I threw on there that might apply or might, be something to highlight. But just talking about inflation is impacting consumers and towing carriers alike, which may actually tie in a little bit to here, C or whatever on number 4, that comparison. And then this, obviously, this is something I put in there. I think I've shared before. This is kind of mostly my position as of now. So this can obviously change if most people in the task force disagree, but that more information is needed, and just kind of, we don't have a lot right now, right? And then again, this is what I have brought up, but is not necessarily what we're going to do, is that, pricing structure, because we really have a couple options, right? We have, I guess, 3 options. We can say, hey, we have this data, and because of this data and this work we've done, we've determined that these rates are too low and they need to be increased to this amount. We could say, hey, we've done this research and we have this data and we think rates are too high for these specific areas and they need to be reduced to this exact amount. Or we can say, we don't quite have the data. Our recommendation is to continue as is, and the towing task force will continue its work next year, and we may have some recommendations then. Those are kind of the 3 things we can recommend. Mine is obviously the do nothing recommendation, but I think we have to recommend something.
So, I mean, I guess when this is kind of the meat of what the whole task force is, right? Like this is again what they're looking for. And so I guess, like you say, it could be the most bantered or not. And I guess in an effort to figure out like how much time needs to be dedicated to this, if we can get it done, does it make any sense? I know we don't have, a lot of the members right now here, but does it make any sense to do like kind of a straw vote to see where people stand, so we know maybe how much time we're going to need to discuss and try to get to a final resolution?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Brandon, just to see where we're at. I mean, I'd be happy to start. We can just go around the horn and everyone can just kind of say, here's where I'm at on that particular thing. And so at least with the group here, we kind of know kind of where folks are at, and then maybe do the same thing at our next meeting. But I would agree with Brandon, like this is going to be the meat of it. So like maybe we should figure out if we're all over the map and everyone has different opinions, if we're all kind of on the same page, and then kind of approach our meetings like that. So as I mentioned, my position at the moment is like, we got some good data. We should take it into account, but I don't think we're anywhere near having the kind of data or analysis available, and we're not going to by November, to make a recommendation that's more thorough and accurate and reasonable than all the economists and professionals that the Public Utilities Commission have made in the past, is what I would argue. But because we'll go around the horn, I'll just call people out. See here, Brandon, what are your thoughts? You'll be number 2.
I mean, I'm similar. I think that it's kind of we just need to stay as is for now and maybe reevaluate in the future. I think that the times are turbulent and they're not normal times. So anything that we try to base on these times, unless we have good data, is probably going to be flawed, right? Inflation is high. Is it going to stay high? Is it going to go low? Like, it just seems very flawed right now.
Yeah. Mr. Connolly?
I think the whole system's fucked up.
Well,
So you'd be recommend increase, decrease, or stay the same?
The whole system is messed up. As a tower, I've been in this 50 years next year, all right? 50 years in this business. Things changed way too fast. You look a year ago at the fuel prices, look at them today. Okay. When you have hits like that, when insurance hits you at, up 300+% overnight, those are costs that you have to absorb now. All right. The equipment costs have gone outrageous in 6 months' time. I mean, the truck I bought for $112,000 in February today is $135,000. There's no rhyme or reason to any of this crap. And the system we have in place requires 1 million people's input, 1 million hours, years upon years to go through processing and everything else to get increases. The system's broke. And so all in all, the system's broke. As far as how does this board come up with a price, you don't have it right now. I mean, we don't have the data. You don't have numbers. You cannot, and this is someone go in the business, you cannot say how much to charge if you don't know your numbers. Those come into play. All right. If I'm doing 5 tows a year, I'm gonna have to charge a hell of a lot more than if I'm doing 5,000 tows a year. Okay. It's just simple math. It's common sense stuff. You know, when you buy a heavy wrecker and it costs you $1.3 million, how many tows do you have to do to pay for $1.3 million piece of equipment? That doesn't include the driver, the insurance, the maintenance, Jesus Christ. The list is unbelievable. But here again, if I'm doing 1 tow, I'm going to have to charge a hell of a lot more than if I'm doing 1,000 tows, right? We don't have that information. We need to make it more, it has to be more of a mandatory thing in the process. The whole system has to be upside down. We need to turn the whole system upside down to make it work. And it's not just private property. You got to remember, PUC also does law enforcement. There's a lot more to the world than just someone's private property. I mean, really, if you want to help solve the problem, then this is what we do. We eliminate non-consensual towing, period, as far as being regulated by the PUC. All non-consensual towing is free to the consumer, period. All of them. Law enforcement, private property, it's all free to the consumers. No consumer pays, period. It's free. Okay. That's how you fix the problem.
And then there'd just be there'd be no towing.
No. See, this is where everyone forgets. This is a guy that's got 50 years in this business. Okay. If no consumer has to pay, someone's going to have to pay, right? As a tower, it can't be done for free. I don't shit $100 bills. Okay. I don't have a money tree. That's all a myth, right? But if you eliminate the consumer problem out of this, then it'll cure itself. It'll cure itself. It's like I said with the snowstorm. How does the snow get shoveled off the walk? Someone's got to do it, right? Someone's got to pay someone to do it. No one does it for free. It's no different than towing. It's a service. Someone wants to, if the property owners want to pay to have that service done, no different than their landscaping, no different than their snow removal. Same thing with law enforcement. If law enforcement wants us to go out and drag crap off the highway, store it for 6 years, and then dispose of it in a junkyard, they can start paying. Why are we having the consumers pay for it? You know what? I'll make more money that way, to be honest with you. So I don't know if you want my opinion, but that's where I'm at.
Well, out of the 3 options, at least that are available to us now in the present circumstances, the do nothing. I guess let me paraphrase what you said. Tell me if it's correct. Do nothing in the current situation, but the whole thing does need to be fixed in a very meaningful, overhauled way at some point.
It does.
Yeah.
And really, I don't think if I had the data in my own business that we have today as a board, I could not set rates for my customers on the data that we have.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just telling you that.
All right. Mr. Pierce.
I agree that we're just not in a position and don't have the data. Well, for one, we have a survey that's, again, it's short on responses. I like having 40 because you do have a reasonably large number, but I don't see that as representative yet. So I'm hesitant to make any strong recommendations based on that. Also, we have not really analyzed this data. We've done a cursory overview of it and a good analysis. I don't think we're there yet. And given how soon we have to have a report, I suspect we're not going to get there yet. To give an example, one of the things I think we really need, and we're not doing it now because we're going through a democratic process, which is good, but it's a stall. One of the things we need is to compare hook rates to the table of expenses that we have from the prior survey, and just to extract out how the hook rate is for consensual tows is adding up against that data in the other charts. And John has kindly offered for us to look at books to have an example business that we could see total cost and maybe use those as an exemplar from which to derive non-consensual costs and how you might possibly start to pull out consensual rates and how that might affect non-consensual rates. I don't think we're anywhere near close enough to be able to do that in a responsible way. So I'm happy to do it. To say we're not there yet. We don't have the data yet. With regard to a number of other components, though, so for example, we are commenting on the CPI and that effect on the rates, and so that's part of the recommendation to stay put versus change things. And I've heard enough from Joyanne and others of this committee to say that it would be useful to not just cite CPI, but other useful indexes that would be things that would be very useful for us in a more thorough review to use to have different benchmarks by which to determine whether the rate increases, whether rate increase or decrease or stay put is actually warranted. And then I guess a final point is we have also brought up the possibility of looking at particular chunks of the rates, so specific items that are on the spreadsheet, and whether any specific items might be addressed. I'm also of the mind that that's worth looking at, and I think that it would be good for us to weigh in to some extent on whether or not we think specific rates where we're hyper focused on what is actually being charged, whether there should be any charge or whether they can be lowered or raised. I think would be useful there. We don't have to weigh in with any specific recommendations, but we might hopefully come to a consensus with regard to whether that specific focus would be useful to do when we do a more thorough overview. So summary, I think a good responsible job is still available to us, but not by our deadline. So I'm happy to say let's leave it as is, but really work hard to get both the data and the analyses in place for recommendations next year.
You're muted.
All right.
I see your mouth moving.
Thanks, Michael. Ms. Rusha, what thoughts do you have?
Mr. Forbes, I always have thoughts. I actually forgot the original question.
No problem. It was basically it's almost a straw poll of saying, hey, there's three options that hey, let's make a concrete recommendation to lower specific rates, make a concrete recommendation to raise specific rates, or hey, let's keep them as is, let the task force continue to do its work next year. But as of right now, we don't have the data to make any specific recommendations on rates.
Okay, so I just had I thought that was the question, but I have two follow-ups to that. Are we talking about all of the charges, or just like the hook fee, or is it all of them? Is that the straw poll? Is the first question. And then second, I didn't understand, does this question include CPI or not? Like no changes and we keep going with the CPI, or we don't use the CPI, or TBD?
I'm sorry.
So is the question, are we taking a straw poll on, we don't recommend, to increase rates, but we still assume there will be an increase in rates based on the CPI? Or is the CPI thing like a TBD?
So yeah, no, good question. So the CPI increase, this is from a rulemaking, so it just happens, right? And so
I understand how it works, but we're making recommendations, and that's why I was asking, am I voting keep it the same, and I'm also in agreement that the CPI index increases are appropriate, or does that make sense? Is that not even is that not part of this straw poll? Outside of CPI, do we make any other recommendations? Is that your question? And I can't hear
And
you.
your mouth muted again.
there we go. So I guess, it's not an up or down straw poll. Your position could be more nuanced, like you just described, right? My position was that, hey, everything just continues as is based on current statute and rule, which would, in this case, there would be a CPI change of some kind that would happen in the spring, according to the rule. And so that would just happen however the cards fall out. So that's my recommendation, is just whatever happens. We don't recommend any real adjustments in rates in either direction, whether that's CPI, no CPI, any of that. But you might have a more nuanced recommendation that would be, hey, that maybe involves CPI of some kind. So I guess it's not necessarily up or down vote. It's just your general thoughts on, if you had to recommend something today to the commission regarding rates, what would that be?
I have so many thoughts. So my recommendation, so I, as a whole, I would be a no on increasing rates. Piecemeal, there are some rates I think need to be reevaluated. For example, after hours fees, which I've talked about, and the admin fees. I know the legislature addressed that, but when I took a look at other jurisdictions, they still seem to be too high. So I would be in favor of decreasing those and keeping the other fees the same. I also would like the PUC to consider, reevaluate the CPI and at least consider other points of data, like PCE data, which is probably a separate conversation. That's why I wanted clarification, make sure I was answering the right question and it was captured for the minute. So does that make sense, Trevor?
Yeah. So basically, most fees, your recommendation would be most fees stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Do not make any CPI increases, and reduce specific fees.
So on the CPI, I think it would be in the state's best interests that a body, and maybe it's the PUC and staff, take a second look at the justification for using CPI and seeing if there are other data points. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
I have some flags, but I don't have a firm opinion one way or another. I do think though that it is worth considering,
Gotcha.
and
to include maybe the CPI is not the right benchmark, for example.
or maybe it totally is, but I'd like somebody to revisit that and kind of restate that justification and explore, are there other data points we might want to include or at least consider, so it's because the CPI does have, its
Flaws.
shortcomings as well, right? For
For-
both sides, for the towers and also for the consumers.
Yeah.
And it's just one snapshot of the economy, right? So, so to recap, I think that somebody should take a look at the CPI automatic increase. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it could be revisited. I think that after hours fees should be eliminated. That would be 0. I think administrative fees could probably be reduced based on the data I saw and what other jurisdictions do. All other fees, I think it's reasonable that they stay the same for now. That's my straw poll. And I know I gave a way more complicated answer than what you asked.
No,
But
that's helpful for sure.
But I still talk less than John.
I could add to that.
I love you, John. I really do. I appreciate you so much.
The CPI, I agree, because when PUC does the CPI, they do transportation. Boom. That's it. They don't add property. They don't add they don't take any consideration for your personnel, anything.
Yeah. And on the
Well-
on the consumer side, it also misses like key data when we're trying to measure what's affordable. So I don't know if it's good for either party is what I was trying to say. So I don't know what the answer is, but if we can put it in the minutes or I can write it in our write-up, a little asterisk, that might be something that the PUC can look at a future date.
I actually agree with that for sure. So, Mr. Riley, I see your hand up.
And I wasn't sure when where I was up on the queue. I know we're going kind of.
You were next.
Okay,
You-
great. Okay,
Your
so the reason I raised my hand is because I wanted to jump in when Joanne was making a comment about a reduction in the notification fees. I don't think we can do that. I don't think the commission could do that. Those fees are specifically put in statute. I don't know that the commission can deviate from that. If it's what's in the statute, it's what's in the statute. And so we obviously did see a reduction, at least for the notification fee for private property tows, which again is a lot of what we're looking at here. So they cut it in half. It was $150 for a long time, dating back at least a decade or longer. And they just cut it in half to $75. And again, it's for just straight private property tows. Doesn't matter if it's from a business or a residential, doesn't matter. Private property, $75. So they did just reduce that.
Right, but Nate, does it say that the PUC can allow this up to this much, or is it that is the fee? And maybe that's a question we figure out later. I don't want to go down.
No,
Yeah, no,
it's in legislation.
yeah, I can answer that. It's very weird, Joanne, like the way it is. Like almost all the fees are basically delegated to the PUC, right? But for whatever reason, in 1970 or whatever, when the original law was written, for some reason that specific fee, the part that has a notification, was put in statute as opposed to delegated to the PUC. I think because it has a little bit to do with the towers having to pay money for these searches to the state. So there's a revenue center for the state. Every time we do a VIN search, the state has basically mandated we can't use a third-party service. We must pay the state money in order to access their database. And so I suspect that has something to do with why it's in statute, not rule. But it's
Right.
that particular fee is this weird, unique thing, and I don't know.
There's
Okay.
a lot of history on that.
Okay, for whatever it's worth, it's 3 times the fee that Utah, even the reduced fee, has.
Well, but here's the thing: when you think about that fee, what do you consider in the fee?
I don't understand your question.
Well, you say the fees is too much. So what fee are you thinking is too much? I mean, what do you think the cost is to the tower for that fee? Besides the certified mail. So if I had to send out 2 certified mails, that's not a cost, right? It's a minimal cost. It's not the $150 is what I'm saying. It doesn't cost me $150 to send 2 certified mailings out, right? Because I'm looking at the cost of what the certified mail is. But what you're missing is the payment I have to pay for the person to do that, right? So if I have a person that has to do all that, get on the computers, things like that, that's where that cost comes into. Was the 150 high? Well, it is more today than it was 10 years ago. right? Because 10 years ago, everything wasn't electronic. Everything had to be hand trucked across the town. So today it's a little more electronic, but you still have to file, you have to follow the state rules. You still have to sign up. You have to get into their programs. You have to run
And
notifications. You got to,
how much does it cost for you to do a notification search per search?
per search, I think we are at, I want to say it's like 450, then 750 for like the mailings. It's about 10, 12 bucks a piece. So if you send one or two people, you're looking at, you're 20, 25 bucks into it. You have a person that you're paying 20, 25 bucks an hour to do that.
But
So
do you have one person who does that? I mean, I guess I'm just saying other jurisdictions manage with, I mean, again, you are also charging a consumer for the privilege of you notifying them that you took their vehicle.
Well, but no, because we're mandated to, right? So we don't have the option. We have to do it. We're by law, we have to do it, otherwise we're fined, right? So we have to do it.
From my standpoint, I think that's something towing companies can figure out. If there's a concern on cost, you can figure out how to do it more efficiently, particularly in, the tech world. If the state is charging what you think is too much to run a search or VIN or plate search or whatever it is, then that's a conversation I think the industry has to have with the state that would save consumers money and it would save you money. Like I said, I just did kind of random searches through different jurisdictions across the country. Most didn't have that fee or it was significantly lower. And sometimes this is the cost of doing business, for the privilege of towing people's cars. So I think it should be lower than the 75 that it currently is now. But that's just, that was just my take. But I do appreciate that there are soft costs and overhead and staff and things like that, which I think have been calculated to the best of our ability in the survey that you helped design. Or at least we tried to capture it. Tried.
I didn't like that survey.
I appreciate you, John.
So, but anyway, considering there's an actual fee that is listed in statute, and again, it does say that an operator shall, and this is based on the new language, it says an operator shall not charge more than $75 to send the notice. Anytime they put in a maximum like that, people can always charge less than that. I don't know how open the commission would be to reducing that, considering that the legislature specifically pointed out a price point in the statute itself. But again, it's always something they could consider. Legally, it sounds like they could shift it down if they were so inclined. I don't know what kind of an appetite the commission would have for that, though. But again, I don't speak for them. I just based on my opinion.
Right. It's a max. It's a max.
I just made, if possible, somewhere in our report or notes, and I'm happy to type it. I just wanted on the record that I flagged it. If we don't have to vote on it or anything.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not asking to break anything.
It's just part of that broken system I was telling you about.
Yeah.
Sure. But anyway, getting back to just I just wanted to touch on that because it was something that kind of raised the flag with me. But anyway, getting back to just our general discussion points, I do think, we need to put a recommendation in whatever way, as part of this report. Again, if we all agree a rate increase is appropriate or a rate decrease is appropriate, or maybe a combination, like some fees go up, some fees go down, or, at the end, just saying, no, we think the rates should stay the way they are right now, with no significant changes. That I think does rise to the level of a recommendation, basically saying, hey, there are things that the commission is currently doing, like the addition of the new CPI, that really haven't had time to see if it's going to work or not. And I do like that the commission has tried this new CPI inflation adjustment concept. It's something that's pretty new. I mean, it's only been in force for the last couple of years, so we haven't even really seen how it might work. And again, making a reference that this is not the best time to use a tool like this. I don't think rises to the level of just outright attacking the credibility of the concept. I like that the commission is trying something new that again could save the various, and again, not just in the towing industry, but all the different industries that we regulate. I like the idea of them trying something like this, because it is a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of work goes into any rulemaking that we do. And so, trying to figure out new ways and new concepts to try to minimize that amount of work, not just for the industry, but for PUC and its staff as well. I'm always open to trying new ideas like this. And I like that, the commission in this case said, yeah, let's try it. And again, I think we're seeing skewed results just because of the times we live in. And that's unfortunate, because I think something like this could work. But again, I do think the rate, whether we want the current PUC rates, maximum rates for non-consensual tows, to go up or go down or stay the same as they are now, I think the reference to the CPI can be used kind of as a segue from that, saying, listen, the PUC, maybe we keep things the way they are now, because we're still giving some of these new concepts that the commission is trying, these policy shifts, we're giving them a chance to grow a little bit and see if they work. And again, we're seeing probably skewed results now because of everything going on, but it actually hasn't been as bad as I thought it was going to be with everything else that I'm seeing inflation wise. But I think we can treat the CPI as a separate issue, kind of an offshoot of that primary recommendation, which is either rates go up, rates go down, rates stay the same. So again, whatever everyone's comfortable with, I think we can use that addressing of the CPI and this new policy that the commission is trying in relationship to towing rates. I think we can use that as support of whatever recommendation we go with, whatever primary recommendation we go with. And again, with other things too, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding just a lot these days, not just in the towing industry, across the board. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so, making any rash decisions one way or the other could be problematic, especially when you have some of these things that are going on right now that really haven't had time to fully manifest, to actually see if they work or not. So anyway, that was my comment on that.
So I had a quick question just to get some better background on the CPI. Is that adjustment in rules or statute?
Rules.
It's rules.
Okay.
Yeah, it was part of I want to say it was a 2019 rulemaking. It didn't go into effect until, and again, this is just because of how long our rulemaking process takes. We didn't actually see it get implemented until, I believe it was early 2021. I want to say around January. But there was an issue and we had to revisit it and restructure the rules because it didn't quite take the first time. And so we basically, I believe the beginning of this year in March was the first time we actually did okay, it's that time of the year, let's give everything this, whatever the percentage was, boost. And so again, we basically have 1 year where we've done that. Again, not completely across the board, but in relationship to a lot of different towing fees that are in our rules. But yeah, no, it is done. It is but based on rule. It is based on the CPI for whatever it is, Denver, Lakewood, Aurora, or whatever it is. And again, we get that figure directly from CDOLA. So yeah, it's that's the figure we use. We have a particular date of the year that we do it. And again, that's how I think the commission plans on doing it moving forward. Whatever recommendation this task force makes could have an impact on that potentially.
You want the history there?
Well, actually, I'm just trying to think of what more specifically, if we were to put in this recommendation coming from Joanne, how the impact would work. And because it is in rule, I don't think it's viable for this coming year's rates. So the rule would have to change first, right? So if it's in rule, that's basically how the prices are going to go, unless we argue that there should be a shift. if we are implementing Joanne's suggestion, it would be basically that there needs to be a rule change of some sort. And we would be advising or recommending that a variety of indices be taken into account. And that would be more the content of the recommendation versus saying don't use the don't use the CPI this time around, because we can't do that. It's already in rules. It's not. I mean, the time lag it's just not gonna work. So our recommendation would be to revisit that rule basically.
Yeah, I think Joanne's, and not to put words in her mouth, but was based, and I agree. I think I agree with Joanne, is basically saying that, like, you know, I am not we are not convinced that the CPI is the best thing to use, right? And there may be something better, and so it should be looked at that maybe something else should be used. And I agree with that 100%. That, I mean, maybe it is, but it's the only thing to try. So we should look
Can I
at it.
add something to all this? And that,
Yeah.
and Nate, don't take offense to this. This has happened long before you were there. Doesn't matter what recommendations. If you gave a recommendation to PUC today and PUC opened up a rule change today, it wouldn't happen for 2 or 3 or 4 years. That's why the CPI got introduced. We've been trying to fix something to get increases. The last time we tried to increase was 2012. Took to 2016 to get the increase. All right, 2016 we got hit with a 300% increase in insurance. I begged for an increase since 2016. You want to know when that increase happened? Last March. Okay, when it takes 4 and 5 years to get increases, you can't withstand. All right, and it's a broken system. And so yes, there are areas to curb, but you have to rob Peter to pay Paul. There's a lot of loss in the yard. So just saying, when you guys want to change something, when we do that with PUC, it's not a change that happens overnight. It doesn't happen in a month, doesn't happen in 6 months. It's 2-year minimum. The fastest I've ever seen it happen since I was wee high to a grasshopper is 2+ years. Okay. Just so y'all know, don't get expectations that we're going to change everything, because even if we wanted to, it doesn't happen that fast. That department runs extremely slow. And it's not Nate's fault. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah, it's just the rulemaking process that we adhere to. It's the rules of practice and procedure that we follow. That's just how the process works. It's a slow process. It just is.
Extremely.
Real quick, I'm going to kick it over for Mr. Reister to see what thoughts he has. But real quick, Joanne, what's the PCE you mentioned? What is that? The PCE data?
She put it on the chat.
Oh, wait, I think she's on mute. Yeah, I just didn't know what it stood for.
But I had tabs going on. The PCE is the personal consumption. I am not an economist. I'm going to bungle this.
I thought that was a bar.
Someone rescue me here. But it is like, it's a little more in-depth look at what consumers are buying, or if inflation is high or a consumer cannot afford a certain product, like it gives a better look at what else they might be buying. Does that make sense? It's not just the cost of bread, right? It's
right.
So it's more about like spending habits. So that's
It's more
why
comprehensive.
I thought that was, it's a better look into, I think, or additional look that provides, a better insight into, consumer spending power. So I thought that was just one point of data that I brought up from the consumer side, and there might be other points of data, but it's just like an example. And I also think the like numerical difference might be very tiny, but I think that the consumer protection, the CPI index, like that we use for minimum wage, is like different statistical area than what the PUC uses for towing, which might actually not be of benefit for, which something that your industry might raise a red flag about. Anyway, again, I don't know if this is the right way. I do think, what John said has some merit, I mean, and rulemaking is a lot of work. And the PUC has to do a lot of it. So I understand why there would be an automatic increase. I just wasn't sure if the way we do it is maybe the best way for all parties, or if it can accurately capture like years that we've had in the last 2 years. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I just thought
Well,
some other group maybe should take a look or re-justify.
so help me with that though. If you're looking at from the consumer's spending, what view of data are you looking to gain to help the industry? That makes sense. Or how do you, when you're looking at what the consumers are buying and their spending habits? I'm sorry, when you say that, I think, well, if they're buying lipstick or they're buying Gatorade, what does that have to do with towing, right? So I'm a dumb tower, so you got to help me understand where you're coming from in that. I'm not grasping how that information we're using. Does that make sense?
I understand there's confusion, but I don't know what the question is. Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out if you want it, like if you're looking at a different style of CPA, whatever you were calling that, and you said it said it had more to do with consumer spending practices. How do you intertwine that into a towing service, right? I mean, what kind of data are you gaining from that to
it's just,
you know what I mean? I'm lost there.
Yeah. No, it's okay. So the PCE is just another, like, it is another survey of consumer spending. The CPI gets its data from consumers, and like the PCE is more getting its data from businesses. It's just another snapshot of consumer purchasing, including like essential goods, and so it's not just like I said, the price of bread went up or gasoline or whatever, it's it also can give an idea of, folks might be spending less here because something here went up. Does that make sense? Like, so it's not, again, like, I'm not saying
you're not going to McDonald's because the gas bill's too high. I get it.
Yeah. And so that's, or
so you're wanting to put the impact of the people and what's going on in the world kind of into the realm when doing the regulation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has to be like balanced, right? But I mean, there are other things I think that, I mean, just holistically, that should go and kind of do, because we're using the CPI, like, go into consideration, which would be like, wages, cost of living, gas, those things that are not currently calculated. But all I'm asking is that, or all I'm suggesting or putting out there, that it might be beneficial to take a more holistic snapshot to really accurately capture cost, wages, and inflation, which would help both the consumer and the towing industry and anybody at this table, if in the future the PUC decides to like do any recalculation of an automatic price increase, right? Like, that was just one, that the PCE was just one example. That's all. And it could be, and I'm not knocking the PUC. It could be that, with all the options in front of them, they said this was probably going to be the most accurate, the most fair and the easiest way to do it, because even that also takes staff time.
Well, that's something, that brings my head up though. Couldn't we do that as a group?
One sec, because the other piece I did want to mention is that, these rates are statewide, they're not regional, and what someone can afford in Denver, or even if it's like $600, like someone in Moffat County, like that could be their entire weekly wage, or do you know what I mean? Like that.
So I think month's wages, yeah.
Yeah, and so so that we also don't have, we have we don't have a regional approach as well on those. And again, I'm not making a recommendation we go regional. I'd like to, but that's not my recommendation today. I just thought it might be beneficial if the PUC at a later date took another look, or at the very least justified its current practice, you know, with all those really smart folks they have in the governor's office.
Well, you could kind of do that on the board, though.
That's it. That's all I was saying.
I think that would be a good project for the board.
I
Here,
won't die on that hill. I was just pointing it out. But thank you. Thanks, John.
I think that would be kind of interesting, is to see that when PUC does the CPI, we'll get what they pulled it off of, and then we can dissect that against others ourselves, and then give a recommendation next year on how fucked up we think they are. I'm okay with that.
Or not. Maybe it's perfect, but we should for sure. I agree with Joanne 100%. Like,
Y'all need to lighten up, okay?
yeah, I agree with Joanne 100% that like it seems like CPI, it might be the right answer, but it was just picked. And some research should be looked at to find out, like, is that really the best metric? Because there's many metrics out there, and there may be one that makes more sense. So, all right, Mr. Reister, sorry it took so long, but you're up, buddy.
No, it's all good. It gave me a lot of time to think about the response, and a lot of informative comments before. So definitely appreciative to be at the end. So to kind of long story short, I do think, just given the data we have in front of us, the uncertainty related to the economy and CPI and everything else, that keeping things where they are is the right choice for now. But I think it's just important to acknowledge as a board that I think is going to create a lot of pressure for next year to produce something. Because while no recommendation is a recommendation, I don't think that will carry weight for long. And I think the General Assembly expects some type of output, one way or the other. Even if it's just simply, evaluating whether CPI is the right metric in the towing context, or regional versus state. I just think it's important for us to think about that in the future of the outcome that will be expected in the future if we go this route. I do think it is the right route for now, especially given the data that we have, or lack thereof, because a wrong decision here can have significant impacts, and on the industry and on the consumer side, if we pick wrong. So I do think it's the right move right now, but I think it just creates a lot of pressure on us in the future, and the data will be so key to that. And I don't know how we overcome that barrier in March. What changes where we suddenly now have this information, and so that's my big worry. But that exists, whether we chose to go up, down, or stay where we are. And so I just want to make sure we acknowledge that we might have to make a bad decision based on bad data in the future, and I worry about that. But so hopefully we can figure out that barrier.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Mr. Easter. Appreciate it. All right. So it's 4:34. Oh, Mr. Pierce, let your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a request for inquiry on the PCE. Just did a quick read up on the methodology, and it sounds really interesting, but the quick pickup that I got was one of the ways of understanding it is it's going to provide a really good picture of the cost of services that are provided to consumers overall. And an example that I saw was basically the CPI is asking consumers, how much are you spending on such and such pile of goods? And then PCE is looking at businesses who are providing the services, and then saying, how much are you getting for providing these services? And so, to give you an example, would be healthcare. What are you spending as a consumer on healthcare? Well, you're not spending all of the healthcare dollars. It's not coming from you. Some of it's coming from subsidies. Some of it's coming from employer contributions, and so on. And if you ask the healthcare provider how much is coming into you for providing this service, then you're going to get a different number than what the consumer is reporting on how much they're spending on that service. So you're getting this different lens on it, but it also is a very different kind of question. And at least looking at the towers, how much does it cost you to run your business? That's very much a consumer oriented question, especially if you were ever to be receiving subsidies from any place. And so it's super valuable, but I think it's, at least in my sense of how our recommendation would go, I still want to be a little cautious there, because I think for me, I'm just learning the value of the PCE, and would like to have a better sense of what it does and what kind of what my sense is that it's the cost of providing services kind of data versus the cost to the consumer of purchasing those services.
Great. All right. Anyone else? We have anything? We have another 24 minutes. Miss Rusha.
I'm so sorry, Trevor.
Oh no, please go get after it. You're good.
Do we have capacity in this meeting or the next to put it on the agenda to consider, like, we did like kind of the up and down straw poll overall of actually breaking out those fees? That's a really loose question, but I'm asking you as the chair.
Oh, breaking out as far as like
On
a straw poll.
recommendations. Yeah, or maybe whether it's a straw poll now or our next meeting, or whatever. Like, as the chair, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, as far as like, I think it was the after hours and notification. As
Yeah,
far as
there's
breaking out specifically. Yeah.
there's, so how many fees? So obviously, I can't speak for everybody else. I assume we agree that like the diesel is the diesel. But that aside, there's the hookup, there's the drop fee, there's the, or maybe that's also set by statute. There are, help me, Nate. There's the after
more drop.
hours notification.
so-
all the fees.
Okay, so basically, we're gonna have to consider the hook fee is the big fee that is probably most applicable.
Mhm.
We also have mileage applies as well. We have a mileage fuel surcharge, although that actually has been that has its own actually monthly inflation adjustment based on gas prices, diesel prices specifically. So that actually has been in effect for as long as I can remember, 2012, probably even prior to that. So there might not be much for the towing task force to do with that particular charge, but I mean, again, there's a base rate, and then it gets it's basically like a minimum, and then it could be higher than that based on gas prices. We then have storage charges, after hours release, and then again the statutory notification. I suppose it's possible you could roll a drop charge into that, because again, that's still going to be a thing, at least for non-residential tows that are non-consensual. So I guess we can make have a discussion about
You
that.
got to
as
know
well,
there's,
if we
you got to know there's 3 different categories, right, of the towing. It's no longer just a single category. You got to remember that now on private property, there's different categories on private property.
Yep.
So that's kind of muddied up the water some.
Yeah, because before it was pretty clear that we had 3 primary categories of tows that we regulated, which was consensual, non-consensual, law enforcement order. I mean, those were the 3 categories. Now, with the new legislation, they've essentially sliced the non-consensual category into 2 pieces, where now it's non-consensual residential and non-consensual non-residential. So again, while there by statute, no fee can be charged for a drop charge for residential non-consensual, there's no such restriction on non-residential non-consensual, if that makes sense.
Like when they always want to tow you when you go to Charlie's. Like,
Wait, what?
like no, I'm just like, wait. So there's no restriction when you're at the bar, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's basically the difference between non-consensual tows from private property that originate from properties that serve businesses versus non-consensual tows from private properties that originate on like more residential style properties, like apartment buildings, mobile home parks, etc. So
Sorry for the snark. That the last time I got towed, that's where my car was. But anyway, But so I guess I should rephrase. Is there going to be like a matrix, like just like we have a fees, where we're all going to take a vote on each of these fees at some point?
Yeah, so I think I understand your question. So I have no plan, but if the group, a majority of people wanted to do it that way, then obviously we do it that way. But I have
Do
no,
you have a-
yeah, I have no plan to say, okay, let's vote on this fee. Let's vote on this fee. As far as recommendations on specific fees, my position would be all of the fees, right? We don't have any real logical data to make any recommendation right now. And so they all stay the same for now. That would be my recommendation, as opposed to kind of breaking out. And because you think if we think we don't have enough data or enough information, that's not going to change from fee to fee. And so any fee in particular we decided to raise up or down, it would be based on like a gut feeling or just a sense of something. There wouldn't be anything to really back it up per se. And so that my position would be like, that's not how I would approach it. But during the next meeting, I mean, someone could bring that up and say, hey, I'd like to propose a vote on doing it this way. And we can certainly take that approach.
I'll make the proposal, but I just want to put out there that even if it just seems like we're saying the same thing every time, it does show that we took it all into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Well, the report's going to have to. I think that's. I forget if it's under part 1 or part 2 of the outline that we have started to put together. But we're going to have to list what the current charges are and how they got there. Like that's part of that, what we're going to do in this report. So yeah, I mean, we're going to have to list out what the current charges are. So yeah, I mean, they will be referenced at the very least in the report, if nothing else, just to say, these are what the fees are right now.
I know. We don't have to devolve in discussion for this today, but I think there's value in having a vote on each of the fees, and we can include notes on, why people voted yes or no, or whatever the votes were, so that there's like some context. But it does show the public, and it shows the commission, and it shows the legislature that we did the best we could with what we had, because I don't know about you, but I have a little bit of anxiety of them coming back and saying, what do you mean you don't have recommendation because you don't have data, So even if it turns out that we're all in agreement on 90% of the things, I don't think it's a bad exercise to go through that and also explain why, does that make sense?
And I think we should chop it into the category too.
Propose the next meeting. That's where I am. And we don't have to, and I don't. It's not my decision, but that was my train of thought.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? Anything we want to discuss before we jump off?
I think we should do what she said and put it in each category as well.
Just say like basically
Well, it's like
like
after hours release. And here's the thing, when like after hours release, you got to think about it in all aspects. An after hours release from a residence, after hours release that was towed from a business, or after hours release towed by law enforcement. Right? Is there a difference? Would there be a difference? Would you consider a difference in any of those three? Are they all the same to you? Right? You have to look at that. What if you're towing a law enforcement and it's DUI? Do you want to be releasing that back to them after they get out of jail an hour or two later?
They can't pick up their car anyway.
Huh? I
They
didn't hear you.
can't pick up their car anyway.
Well, if they get out of jail, I mean, I've had them where they get out of jail, they get out of the drunk tank, and they come down and they want their car.
Well,
And
I mean,
it's like,
if they're legally intoxicated,
but
but
how do I know? I'm not a cop, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm looking at their eyes and how they're talking. I can't say if they're legally drunk, right?
but you can also decline to give them their vehicle if they're intoxicated. Isn't that correct?
If
You believe so?
if I have probable cause under law enforcement, I can not release their car if I feel that they're a danger to the public. If we can have some good grounds to say they're a danger to the public, we don't have to release the car even from private property. So I mean, there's avenues there, but in today's Sue Happy world, that's a dangerous slope to be on.
I just rabbit hole. I was just gonna say thanks for agreeing with me, John. I like it when you say that. But I think if you have different stakeholders and we have a diverse set of opinions weighing in on their justifications for their vote in these separate categories, it shows the public how we arrived to the conclusions that we did. And you know, I just think it would provide more information, right? We probably, and I think we also said 70% to get, right? We had to get more than a majority.
I think, yeah.
Nathan?
Well, I think we determined, that just procedurally, maybe Mr. Roberts can chime in, that, you know, with our recommendation, it'll be like, hey, you know, this is how people voted. Because we're going to have to vote yes or no on the report. People aren't going to be able to say, yes, but on my vote, you're either voting for the report as it is or not. And if we submit a report that only has, call it, you know, one more person than a simple majority, Nate was letting us know, and I think it's true, that the PUC is probably going to discount our recommendations and reports quite heavily. We still submit it; it's still the report, but they're mostly going to be like, yeah, if you guys are like not on the same page, mostly, then like this isn't meaningful to us. But we can still submit. Is that right, Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
No, I understand, but the recommendations is different than the recommendations are in the report. It's part of the report.
Right. So I don't think our report is going to be able to let people vote on, I could be wrong here, on individual recommendations to say like, I'm not voting on the, I'm approving this report to go up. I want to vote on all the individual things in the report, yes or no, like a piecemeal type vote on them. I don't know that that's something we could, a way we could or should approach it.
The report should reflect all of the recommendations, whether we agreed, disagreed, had a supermajority or whatever, and then we can vote on the report as in, does everybody agree this is what we said, even if we don't agree? That's my take on what the report is.
Mr. Roberts, maybe you've seen some other task force reports, like is it, hey, we're doing a report and the committee, you know, committee members are voting or not? Voting yes or no on it? Or are they voting on individual portions and getting their I guess opinions or thoughts on each individual item within the report for posterity purposes?
That's a good question. I haven't seen reports generated from task force. I've seen reports like post accidents on ski lifts and things of that nature, but that's a different kind of a board. They have the direct regulatory authority to do that, so they can vote 5-4 and it passes as the board's action. But I can't imagine that we would, or that the PUC would be interested in seeing. You know, we voted 6-3 on this issue, and unanimous on the other issue. So if that's the question, I don't think we need to get that granular.
I would be concerned if the PUC didn't want to see the breakdown of votes on rates.
I think what's important is whether the task force stands behind the recommendations of the report. This is our report. And you know, you guys can decide how much you want to break that down on whichever issue, you know, that you want to highlight. It's just the rates issue. If you want to say we had a difference of opinion on the task force, and this is how we divided, and you can use names if you want, or just numbers.
Yeah, if the purpose is for optics purposes, for people's various constituencies to know, you know, where they stood or something. I don't think we're going to hide how people voted. I mean, I think on the report we could even list here's how people voted on the report, if the concern is personal optics. Mr. Riley.
So it kind of sounds to me like maybe the best way to move forward with this is, you know, we take that outline, you know, just given that this, you know, report is due, what, 1, 2,
2 weeks.
like, no, it's a little more than that. It's like, it's 4 weeks from
4 weeks.
Tuesday, from this past Tuesday. So less than 4 weeks. I think we should probably start, or Trevor, rather, you should start divvying up the different sections to people or to groups of the members that you think would be best to address these different portions. So like, for example, you might want to, maybe make an assignment to Nicole to do the portion that talks about what the task force has done so far. Because again, she's been tied into the minutes and she watches the recordings, is my understanding. So maybe she's the best person to do that. I could do the portion regarding the data, since I put all the data together for the surveys. And whoever wants to handle all the different sections, again, I think some of them could be done fairly easily, given some of the resources we have already. So like the portion where it talks about, how the rates, what the rates currently are and how they got there. Somebody can just, dive into the primer that was circulated earlier this year and just, pick out choice bits and then put it into a narrative, a few paragraphs outlining, where we are now, how we got there. Once that's all together, I think we have to have as close to a final draft together as possible by the time we have that last meeting on, I think, what is it, the 26th? Because I imagine that meeting on the 26th, which is the one we designated as mandatory. So we should have everybody there, or at least everybody who's still on the task force. I think that if we have something as close to a final draft as possible by that point, and again, if everybody wants to start working on their sections, and then, I'm happy to splice them all together and then give it that nice clean sweep to try to make it as uniform and as clear as possible, as uniform as possible. But if we have that circulated and ready to go by that meeting on the 26th, where hopefully we'll have as much of the membership as possible during that meeting, I imagine that meeting being, kind of to Joyanne's point, I don't know that we need to have individual points on different sections of what the report says, or at least what that draft says. I could see it kind of being, I hate to put it this way, but kind of like a haggle session, where basically if we get to a particular section of the report and we get to a point that somebody's uncomfortable with, they voice that concern right there. And then we adjust the language to a point where now everybody's happy with it. And then we can move on to the next section, and we do that the entire way through the report, so that by the time we get to the end, we only need that one vote. At that point, everybody's had a chance to hear their voice, to have their voices heard on every particular area. I'm sure we'll see some compromises in different areas of the report on what it says. But then by the end, there should be no reason by the end of that exercise that everybody isn't willing to sign on to that report. At least that's kind of how I see this going the most smoothly.
I suspect, I think in a perfect world, yes. I find it unlikely that we're, given the diversity of our group and everything, that we're going to haggle out a report that everyone's like, I agree with everything in the report and I'm good with it. At some point, we'll have to vote, and there will be some folks that have a specific, for Ms. Rusha or Andrea might say, I am not happy unless, I don't think you want to say this, but Andrea might say, unless this, reduces fees by 70%, it's unacceptable. And I don't think the group's going to get to that point to where she's happy with it, possibly, or some other member of the group. And so it's probably unlikely we get to a kumbaya moment, but we should try to get as close to something that we get as many people to vote for it as possible. It may not be everyone on the task force, but maybe we can try to get most people in support of it. Ms. Rusha.
Thank you, Trevor. So just to be clear, what I would like us to do is for us to vote on each individual rate, and we can weigh in. I think it's good to have maybe a quick note in the report if there was a, minority or opinion or whatever. But if that did happen, and let's say I lost the vote on after hours or administrative fees or something, I wouldn't say I'm not voting to endorse the report, because the report is still reflecting it. You know what I mean? Like what we did. Does that make sense? So I just want to make that really clear. I just thought that the report itself should reflect some of the diversity of opinion. Does that help, Trevor?
Yeah. I think
I'm not going to say, I'm just a no then because I didn't get my way like in committee or whatever on an amendment or something. But that's not right. By the end, it's the full bill. So I want to be really clear. That was my intent when I brought that up.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And I think it helps with like transparency, and it helps the public, press, or whomever understand why the report is the way it is.
Gotcha. Awesome. The good thing is anyone who's interested in the public can come watch all of our meetings on video because they're all posted. Given that no one really ever participates in the public comment time, I suspect there's not a keen amount of interest in our task force meetings from the general public. Anyone else?
Yeah, Michael's had his hand up for
Oh, yeah,
quite some
you're right.
time.
Sorry, Mr. Pierce. Go ahead.
You're muted though.
Trying to think just of our practical tasks that we're facing going forward, and wanting to honor Joanne's. Joanne. I'm sorry. I keep on forgetting what it is, and I apologize for getting it wrong. I think that's a really good idea. But on the practical side of things, there's some structure we have to get in place to get through this all. And I wanted just to call attention to what we're looking at. We have 2 more meetings, and I'm worried that we have time to get through all of what we need to do. I'd like to make a suggestion that we all commit for the last meeting to basically a very long meeting where we're all going to stay past 4 until we get this done, because it looks to me like we're going to get to the point where we won't be able to get this done by 4 o'clock on our last scheduled meeting. And I'm also thinking that we need some interim goal points where we're looking at specific pieces of this draft. What do we need to get done by when? In each of the topic areas, do we have any particular decision points that seem like need to be addressed by us as a whole? And so that if we flag those decision points for the particular topic items, we've set aside some time to talk about them, and then try and structure our task in terms of what pieces do we need to get in place by the end of this month. How much time do we need to do them? Assign the task to get them done. So at this point, I think we have an idea of where we need to get, but we don't have quite the task assignments in place to actually get there. And so I was hoping we could focus on that. And yeah, really try and game out how we're going to get to the completion we need to get to in our last meeting.
Don't we have another meeting scheduled for the 12th?
Yeah, next week.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have one for the 12th, and then if Nate is suggesting that we have basically a draft by the end date, which is what, the 28th? No, it's not the 28th.
26th.
Yeah, 26th.
Yeah, 26. We're looking at actually having a draft report done by then. So how do we get to that point?
Yeah, we have another full meeting on the 12th. So our regular Wednesday 2 p.m. meeting next Wednesday, so 6 days from now. We currently don't have anything on the 19th. I suppose if push comes to shove, we could always schedule a work group on the 19th, or even a full meeting on the 19th if need be, that following Wednesday. And then 26th is the big meeting. And like I said, I cannot stress enough that we have to have a as close to finished draft by not only by the 26th, but pre-circulated prior to the 26th, so that people have a chance to read it before coming to that meeting on the 26th. And like I said, I don't disagree with Michael that could turn into a very lengthy meeting to get to the end to where we're finally all ready to take that vote on the approval of the report. And once that's done, that's what's going to the commission on the 1st. So, which is that following Tuesday. So.
Okay, so a suggestion for me now is before we leave, I think it would be good for us to assign drafters for each of these sections.
Agreed.
like, and again, it doesn't have to be a singular person. Like I feel like groups could do this too. Well, I think we might run into an issue with that, right, Mr. Roberts? Maybe it should be individual people then.
Yeah, I think because at the end of the day, the meat of this is 6. Like that, I think 1 through 5, I would hope that mostly people agree with just facts and history, right? But really the meat of where we're going to have a lot of discussion is number 6. So I think maybe 1 through 5, we kind of divvy up, but 6, I think is probably going to have to be done kind of by a committee with everyone there. I suspect.
Could you put that up on the screen again?
Yeah, let me see here. Okay. Yeah, so 6 is really the conclusion and recommendations. 1 through 5 is really just factual things. So my thinking is that 6 will kind of just hash out together. Although I would, I'll put together, based on kind of what I've told you guys my position is, I'll put together a draft conclusion and recommendations that maybe can serve as a starting point, and obviously someone else could do the same. So I don't know that we necessarily assign 6 because that's more of a group thing, but I think 1 through 5, it would be good to assign since those are just kind of, factual things. Does everyone agree with that kind of approach? I just don't know that anyone in particular. I mean, people can, but 6 is going to be more of a group exercise.
Can you, bring that up? Thank you. Right there.
Again, from my perspective, that sounds good. And also just to circle back to the other suggestion I had was that sounds like we're the content of 6 looks to me like that's our key decision point, where we're going to need to talk through that, preferably before the 26th, so preferably the scheduled meeting for the 12th. So if that draft with all of the key points can be ready for discussion, and then we focus on getting through those next meeting as basically one of the primary goals of next meeting. I think that's fairly important.
Sorry, Joanne has to hop off. Is there a particular section you might want to volunteer for? It sounds like the people who are the most involved in this task force are going to be the ones doing this. So is there a particular section you were interested in?
I am more, I have the time, assign me where needed. And I made a note, I think for section 6, we should at least, if it's not drafted, we should have some comments to frame the next meeting, if that's one we're going to talk out loud. And I put in the comments, if Trevor wanted to start, I'd be happy to also add a few in comments only, on the side box or whatever. I don't have something I'm eager to tackle. More, I would like to participate and I have to hop off. So if there's something left over, just assign it to me and I got it.
Joanne, before you hop off, what I might do is, actually, why don't you do this, Joanne? Can you do just some research on CPI, PCEs, some of that stuff maybe? And that
yes.
Okay, that would be awesome to add next meeting.
Would it be helpful to have a paragraph on that and maybe some what it is?
That'd be awesome.
Pros and cons.
Yeah.
Okay, I will do that.
Because I don't think half of us even really know where CPI comes from. So
yeah.
Okay, is that give me a due date? Do you want me to get this back to the
before our next meeting next Wednesday would be great.
So okay. I'm gonna
related
Tuesday.
Related to that was there producer price index too that was relevant? I mean, were there other indexes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Joanne.
We'll do a little memo blurb and then you guys can take it from there. Thank you. Sorry, I have to hop off.
Yep. Thanks,
Appreciate
Joanne.
it as always.
Absolutely.
John, you're still my favorite. Don't tell Trevor that. Bye.
See you later.
So I will I'll volunteer on the history of non-consensual towing rates, just because frankly, we together our businesses, we have lots of data and some stuff on that because we were highly involved in all that. So I'd be happy to tackle the history stuff. But I'll get John's input because John has a lot of history with that too. So maybe me and John together tackle the history of towing rates.
Actually, I like to tackle the consent versus non-consent.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, please do that, John, then.
Oh, John, if you're doing that one, can you also add, and again, this is selfishly just because the report the PUC has to give to the legislature wants us to include the definitions of a consensual versus a non-consensual tow. So I feel like we should put that somewhere. Maybe that section is most appropriate to put it there, which I think is in.
Should we
where did
mention,
we put that?
should we mention the legislators messed up that definition?
I think we'll let them figure that out on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, we should acknowledge that they did mess that up.
I think
so that's
it might be outside of our scope, and I would hate. I don't know.
I would like to. I mean, Mr. Roberts, I'll guarantee you that if I took him to task in a court of law, I would win by the definition change. And I could say that PUC doesn't have authority to govern law enforcement towing because of the way they messed that up. So I honestly believe there should be some mention that there, because there needs to be some change to cover that. If the PUC doesn't cover that, you're gonna have other issues with that. I'm just saying from years of this, you're gonna have issues with someone's gonna push that issue. And by a legal definition, by statute, rules can't trump statute.
so under so the section or the part you're taking, John, is under 4D, which is discussion regarding costs and expenses of consensual versus non-consensual towing.
Right.
And then if you want to add in the whole definitions of both, if you want to add some discussion in there, I can do the rest of 4. Which is the responses by demographic, truck count locations, survey shortfalls, response rate, data validity, approach, etc. And C, changes in expenses carriers have reported versus actual inflation. I can cover all of that. I could probably even do number 1 as well, which is background and authority, explaining the history of the towing task force and the legislative history and mandate. I'll keep it pretty concise. But I'm happy to do 1 and most of 4, and then once John's done with his last portion of 4, I can splice it into the rest of my 4.
Okay,
If that's okay with everyone.
perfect. And I'm writing notes down on who's doing what, so I can send
And
this
then-
out to the.
So yeah, so Trevor, if you're doing 2 history of non-consensual towing rates in Colorado, and again, I would highly encourage you to use that primer to do that, because I think I think that'll make it a lot easier to put that together.
For sure.
And then so all we would have left is 3. Which is work of most recent towing task force, summarize our meetings since the TTF was reformed, matters discussed, etc. I still think Nicole's the best person to do that, honestly.
Okay.
I don't know if she's open to doing that, but she probably is the best person to do that.
I'll email her. I'll send this out to the group and just ask her if that's okay, and if not, I'll ask somebody else to volunteer.
And then 5 is the review of impacts of 2022 legislation on towing industry revenue and financial performance or practical.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that, because just frankly, I just know the impacts on a personal level way more than everybody else. And I'll get some input from Mr. Connolly as well if he has some thoughts on it. But I'll tackle that one and we can adjust as needed.
Do you have anything you want to do, Michael?
I was interested in just looking at the survey and discussing the findings and shortfalls. And so I would be interested in working with you on that, but this raises the issues of that I think John would be good to have answer. Can we set up like a working group of where Nate and I can exchange suggestions for drafts without running afoul of the
I think we can all just handle our own individual portions, and then at the next meeting we can start pushing it all together. So Michael, if you want to handle, what was it, 4B, survey shortfalls, response rate, data validity, approach, etc. It sounds like you'd be perfect to do that portion.
Well, so that's the thing is I don't have the time to put together a full report on that. And I was happy for you to do that, but I was hoping to have just like a I don't know, an assistant and or a I don't know, a contributor kind of role in that.
I think
Well, I can take if you want, I can take a stab at it, and then when we meet next week, I can show you what I have, and then if you feel like we should go in different directions or add more substance to it, then you can chime in and we can go that route if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to get a jump start, I was hoping just to get over the weekend to just some thoughts on that, and I'm just curious if I can do something like put those together and send them to you, and then you can work with them as you want.
Yeah, whatever you want to start putting together. I think we're all kind of going to be going in different directions on these different points, and so I think as long as we're putting our ideas down and writing some things down and doing all that, I think by the time we're ready, in less than a week, 6 days from now, when we have our next meeting, we'll actually have some things that we can start putting together. Like we can actually start, linking these different portions of the report together. I mean, depending on how much is in there. But
Well, if we're all working on this and we call one another or something, and if we're working on the same project and we're bringing everybody's thoughts back to the same meeting, does that violate anything there, Mr. Roberts?
John, is your question, can you call up Trevor between now and the next meeting to talk about what you guys are working on?
Yeah, and if he needs guidance on something or someone else and you need guidance, but everything that you're doing is coming back to the group. There's nothing hidden from the group.
Yeah, no, I see your point. It's just the fact of the communication of the task force business. That's the problem.
Okay. So pretty much we have to do everything on our own and then sit in a long meeting and deal with it together.
Mush it all together. Yeah.
Okay.
And again,
I guess
it's not ideal, but it's the best way we can do it, I think, given the constraints.
Actually, a suggestion is so for example, my request is to be able to send Nate some observations, for example, items I would love to see included. One way of doing that is just to send that to Nate, but CC everybody in the task force. But that would keep everyone in the task force involved. I'm not sure that would satisfy the public, any kind of public transparency.
I don't think it would. I think honestly, guys, I think the only practical way to have like sidebar working groups is to have a working group, right? Like if you're sending an email directly to me, for example, whatever, at the end of the day, it's not public and we're doing task force business, not in the public. And so it's dumb and it makes it very inefficient to get work done and stuff, but it's the government and that's the rules. So I just don't think we can do any of that. Right.
That's why it takes 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is, right?
Yeah. So that's right, John, Mr. Roberts. Yeah. Okay.
Remember, you gotta grasp on this open meeting law stuff, man.
I'm scared of this. I'm trying not to get in trouble, Mr. Roberts. I'm nervous.
You're doing great.
All right. So what I will do, what I will do on section 4 is and draft what I would think of as additional pieces to that, and then we can merge them next meeting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right, everybody. It's got to stop us. It's 5:14. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for the hard work. I'm going to send out the document I was showing you. I put some notes in there and who's doing what. I'm going to send that out to the group because that's just the outline. It's not anything substantive. And so everyone's kind of on the same page. We'll get together next week and hopefully we make some progress. So, all right, everyone. Thank you.
Great.
All right.